Sarah Martinez had always been known as the warrior in her neighborhood, not because she fought wars, but because she never gave up on anything or anyone she loved. When her 8-year-old son disappeared 3 weeks ago, the police had already started treating it as a cold case. But Sarah refused to accept that her boy was gone forever. The morning of October 15th started like every other morning since vanished. Sarah woke up at 5 a.m., made coffee she wouldn't drink, and spread missing person flyers across her kitchen table. The faces of her smiling son looked back at her from dozens of copies, his gap-toothed grin a painful reminder of what she had lost. Detective had called the night before with more disappointing news. The search teams had covered a 50-mile radius around their small Texas town. They had checked abandoned buildings, interviewed hundreds of people, and followed every lead that came their way. Nothing. It was as if had simply vanished into thin air. But Sarah knew something the police didn't. 3 days before disappeared, he had been acting strange. He kept talking about hearing voices under their house. Sarah had dismissed it as childhood imagination, but now she wondered if she had missed something important. Their old farmhouse sat on the outskirts of a town so small that everyone knew everyone else's business. The house had been in Sarah's family for 3 generations. Her grandmother used to tell stories about the house having secret passages and hidden rooms, but Sarah had always thought these were just fairy tales meant to entertain children. Had been fascinated by these stories. In the weeks before his disappearance, he spent hours crawling around the basement, tapping on walls and listening for hollow sounds. Sarah had found him several times lying on the basement floor with his ear pressed against the concrete, claiming he could hear someone calling for help. The basement was old and damp, with thick concrete floors that her grandfather had poured himself in the 1940s. Sarah had never paid much attention to it before, using it mainly for storage and laundry. But after his disappearance, she found herself spending more and more time down there, hoping to understand what had captured her son's imagination so completely. On this particular morning, Sarah decided to take another look at the basement. She grabbed a flashlight and headed down the creaky wooden stairs. The basement smelled of mildew and old cardboard boxes. Dust particles danced in the beam of her flashlight as she moved it slowly across the concrete floor. She started in the corner where she had most often found listening. The floor looked solid and unremarkable, just gray concrete with a few cracks from age and settling. But as she knelt down and placed her ear against the cold surface, she heard something that made her heart skip a beat. It was faint but unmistakable, a rhythmic tapping sound like someone hitting metal against stone. Tap, 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 pause, tap, tap, tap. The sound seemed to be coming from directly beneath the floor. Sarah's hands began to shake as she pressed her ear closer to the concrete. The tapping continued in the same pattern, over and over again. This wasn't the sound of pipes settling or mice in the walls. This was deliberate, purposeful, like a signal. She ran upstairs and grabbed a hammer from her toolbox. Back in the basement, she began tapping on the floor in response to the sounds she was hearing. Immediately, the pattern changed. The tapping became more urgent, more frequent. Someone or something was definitely down there, and they were responding to her. Sarah's mind raced as she tried to process what this meant. Could be trapped somewhere beneath their house. But how was that possible? The basement had been built on solid ground, and she had never seen any entrance to a lower level. She spent the next hour tapping different areas of the floor, trying to map out where the sounds were coming from. The responses seemed to be concentrated in an area about 6 feet square, directly under what used to be her grandfather's workbench. The workbench had been moved to the garage years ago, leaving only 4 small holes in the concrete where the legs had been bolted down. Sarah had never thought much about these holes before, but now she examined them more closely with her flashlight. The holes were deeper than she had expected, and when she shined the light down into them, she couldn't see the bottom. She found a long screwdriver and pushed it down into one of the holes. It went down at least 2 feet before hitting something that felt like wood. Sarah's heart was pounding now. She realized she needed help, but she was afraid to call the police. They had already searched the house thoroughly and found nothing. Would they believe her story about hearing tapping sounds from under the floor? Or would they think the stress of disappearance had finally driven her to a breakdown? Instead, she called her brother Carlos, who lived 20 minutes away. Carlos was a construction worker who would know how to safely break through concrete if that's what needed to be done. When she explained what she had discovered, Carlos didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way," he said. Don't do anything until I get there. If someone is really trapped down there, we need to be careful not to hurt them." While she waited for Carlos to arrive, Sarah continued her communication with whoever was below. The tapping had evolved into a more complex pattern now. 3 quick taps, then a pause, then 2 taps, then another pause. It reminded her of Morse code, though she didn't know enough about it to translate the message. Carlos arrived with a toolbox full of equipment and his friend Dave, who worked in demolition. Both men were skeptical until they heard the tapping for themselves. Dave put his ear to the floor and listened for several minutes, then looked up at Sarah with amazement. "There's definitely someone down there," he confirmed. "And from the sound of it, there's a pretty good-sized space underneath this floor. We need to break through, but we have to be careful. If we hit whoever's down there with falling concrete, we could seriously hurt them." Carlos and Dave spent the next hour planning their approach. They decided to start by drilling several small holes in the concrete to get a better idea of what was underneath. Then they would use a concrete saw to cut out a section large enough for someone to climb through. As they prepared their equipment, Sarah knelt by the floor and tapped out a simple message. "Help coming! Stay away from this spot!" The response came immediately, several quick taps that sounded almost joyful. Sarah closed her eyes and prayed that they would find alive and unharmed. After 3 weeks of not knowing, she was finally going to get some answers. But as much as she hoped for the best, she couldn't shake the feeling that whatever they found under that floor was going to change everything. The drill bit hit something hollow after going through 8 inches of concrete. Carlos and Dave exchanged glances as they felt the resistance change. Whatever was down there, it wasn't solid earth or rock foundation. Dave carefully pulled the drill bit out and shined a small flashlight down the hole. "I can see wooden planks," he reported. "Looks like there's definitely a room or chamber down there, and I can see light reflecting off something, maybe water." Sarah's stomach clenched with worry. If there was water down there and had been trapped for 3 weeks, she couldn't let herself think about it. She had to stay strong and focused. Carlos began drilling more holes in a rectangular pattern, each one confirming what they had suspected. There was a hidden room beneath the basement floor, and it was much larger than they had imagined. The wooden ceiling was only about 8 inches below the concrete, which explained why the sounds had been so clear. As they prepared to use the concrete saw, Sarah heard something that made her blood run cold. Through one of the holes, she could hear what sounded like crying. Not the strong, steady sobbing of an adult, but the quiet whimpering of a child. She called down through the hole, "Is that you?" The crying stopped immediately, followed by a voice that was weak but unmistakably her son's. "Mama, Mama, I'm down here, I can't get out." Sarah's knees gave out and she collapsed next to the hole, tears streaming down her face. Her son was alive. After 3 weeks of fearing the worst, was alive and responding to her voice. "I'm here, baby," she called down to him. "We're going to get you out right now. Are you hurt? Are you okay?" "I'm hungry, Mama, and it's cold. There's a man down here, but he won't wake up. I think he's sick." A man, Sarah's relief turned to alarm, who was down there with her son, and if this man was unconscious or worse, how had survived for 3 weeks. Carlos and Dave worked faster now, cutting through the concrete with urgent precision. The saw made a terrible noise, filling the basement with dust and the smell of burning concrete. Sarah kept talking to through the hole, trying to keep him calm and gather information about his situation. "Honey, how did you get down there? Can you see any way out?" "I fell through a hole in the floor." His voice was getting stronger now that he knew help was coming. "I was following the man because he said he knew where treasure was hidden, but then the floor broke and we both fell down here. The man hit his head really bad." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. Someone had lured her son into this trap. This wasn't an accident, it was kidnapping. But why would someone kidnap only to fall into the same trap themselves? After an hour of careful work, Carlos and Dave had cut a hole large enough for an adult to fit through. They used a crowbar to pry up the section of concrete, revealing the hidden chamber below. Sarah shined her flashlight down into the opening and gasped at what she saw. The space was much larger than she had expected, easily 15 feet wide and 20 feet long. The ceiling was made of old wooden planks, and the walls appeared to be carved directly into the earth and reinforced with stone. In one corner, she could see huddled under what looked like an old blanket. He was thin and dirty, but he was sitting up and looking toward the light with hope in his eyes. Across the room, she could see the motionless figure of a man lying on the floor. "I'm coming down, baby," Sarah called to as she prepared to lower herself through the opening. Carlos grabbed her arm. "Let me go first," he said. "We don't know if it's safe down there, and we don't know anything about this guy who's with." Carlos dropped down into the chamber and immediately went to check on. The boy was dehydrated and weak, but otherwise seemed to be unharmed. Carlos lifted him up toward the opening where Dave was waiting to pull him to safety. Sarah gathered in her arms, hardly able to believe he was really there. He was thinner than before and his clothes were dirty and torn, but he was alive and alert. She held him close while Carlos examined the unconscious man. "He's alive, but barely," Carlos reported. "Looks like he's been unconscious for a while. He's got a serious head injury and he's severely dehydrated. We need to call an ambulance right away." As Dave called 911, Sarah sat with and tried to piece together what had happened. Explained that 3 weeks ago, he had been playing in the basement when he heard someone calling for help. When he went to investigate, he found a man who claimed to be trapped down there. "He said his name was Frank, and he told me there was treasure hidden in the old part of the house," said. "He showed me a loose board in the floor and said we could both get rich if I helped him move it. But when we stepped on it, it broke and we fell down here." Pointed to a section of the ceiling where several wooden planks had broken through, creating the hole they had fallen through. The planks had fallen into the chamber with them, and had been using them to try to signal for help by tapping on the ceiling. "Frank was really hurt when we fell," continued. "He bled a lot from his head and then he went to sleep and wouldn't wake up. I tried to wake him up lots of times, but he just wouldn't move." Sarah realized that this Frank character had likely been unconscious for most of the 3 weeks was trapped. That meant her 8-year-old son had survived alone in this underground chamber with no food and only water that had leaked in from a broken pipe. As paramedics arrived and prepared to extract the unconscious man from the chamber, Sarah learned more about the hidden room. According to, there were several other rooms connected to this one, accessible through narrow passages in the walls. "Frank had a flashlight when we first fell down," said. "Before he went to sleep, he showed me the other rooms. There's lots of old stuff down there, boxes and bottles and even some old clothes. He said this used to be where people hid during the war." Sarah realized that her grandmother's stories about secret passages and hidden rooms hadn't been fairy tales after all. This underground complex had been built decades ago, probably during World War II when people were worried about air raids or invasions. The paramedics managed to extract Frank from the chamber and rushed him to the hospital. He was alive but in critical condition from his head injury and severe dehydration. Police officers arrived to document the scene and take statement. Detective, who had been leading the search was amazed by the discovery. "In all my years of police work, I've never seen anything like this," he told Sarah. "This Frank guy, we ran his ID and he's got a record for petty theft and fraud. Looks like he was probably trying to rob your house when he discovered this hidden room." The detective explained that Frank had likely been casing the house for weeks, possibly even months, before making his move. He had probably been hiding in the underground chambers during the day and emerging at night to explore the house and plan his robbery. "My guess is that he figured out how to access these rooms from outside the house," detective said. "We found evidence that he'd been camping in the larger chamber for several days before discovered him. He had food, water, and camping gear down there." As the investigation continued, Sarah learned that Frank had been released from prison just 2 months earlier after serving time for breaking into empty houses and stealing valuable items. He had a pattern of targeting older homes that he thought might contain hidden valuables or antiques. But his plan had gone wrong when discovered him. Instead of running away, Frank had tried to use to help him search for valuables in the house. When the floor collapsed under their combined weight, both had become trapped in the same chamber Frank had been using as his hideout. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Frank's attempt to kidnap and exploit a child had resulted in him becoming trapped in his own hiding place, unable to escape without the very help he had tried to steal from his family. Over the next few days, as recovered in the hospital, police and historians worked together to fully explore the underground complex beneath Sarah's house. What they discovered was far more extensive than anyone had imagined. The hidden chambers formed a network of rooms and tunnels that stretched under most of the house and even extended beyond its foundation. Some passages led to exits hidden in the nearby woods, while others connected to what appeared to be storage areas and even a small underground workshop. Doctor, a historian from the local university, was brought in to examine the complex. After spending 2 days underground with a team of archaeologists, she emerged with an incredible story. "This isn't just a simple hideout," she explained to Sarah and the gathered investigators. "This is a sophisticated underground railroad station that was built in the 1940s, but not for the reasons we initially thought." Doctor had found documents and artifacts that told the true story of the chambers. During World War II, Sarah's grandfather, Martinez, had been part of a secret network that helped Mexican and Mexican-American families who were being unfairly targeted by deportation raids. "Your grandfather was a hero," Doctor told Sarah. "During the 1940s, there was a government program that deported thousands of Mexican Americans, even those who were U.S. citizens. Many families in this area were broken up, with some members sent to Mexico even if they had never lived there. Martinez had used his position as a respected farmer and his knowledge of construction to create this underground sanctuary. Families who were in danger of deportation could hide in the chambers until it was safe for them to travel to other states where they had relatives or supporters. The network had operated for nearly 10 years, helping dozens of families escape persecution. The chambers had been designed with multiple exit routes, hidden ventilation systems, and even a small underground well that provided fresh water. "The most amazing thing," Doctor continued, "is that your grandfather kept detailed records of everyone he helped. We found journals and photographs documenting the rescue of over 40 families between 1942 and 1951. Sarah was overwhelmed by this revelation. Her grandfather had died when she was very young, and her grandmother had never spoken about his wartime activities. She had always known he was a good man, but she had never imagined he was involved in anything so important and dangerous. The discovery explained why I had been so fascinated by the basement before his disappearance. Some of the chambers contained items left behind by the families who had hidden their children's toys, family photographs, religious artifacts, and personal belongings that told the stories of people who had lived in fear, but found safety in the underground sanctuary. Who was released from the hospital after 3 days of observation, was eager to return to the underground chambers. But this time, he would explore them safely, with proper lighting and adult supervision. "I knew there was something special down there," told his mother as they prepared to visit the chambers together. "I could feel it when I was listening through the floor. It wasn't scary, it was like the house was trying to tell me a secret." When they descended into the main chamber where it had been trapped, Sarah was struck by how different it felt now that it was properly lit and cleared of debris. The walls were covered with messages carved by the people who had hidden their names, dates, prayers in Spanish, and even some children's drawings. Showed his mother around the complex like an experienced tour guide. He had memorized every passage and chamber during his 3 weeks underground, and he knew the location of every artifact and hiding place. "This is where I found the water," he said, pointing to a corner where a hidden spring provided a constant flow of fresh water. "And this is where Frank kept his stuff before he got hurt." The area where Frank had made his camp was clearly separate from the historical chambers. Police had found evidence that he had been living there for at least a week before discovered him, surviving on canned food and bottled water he had brought with him. Frank himself had been kept under police guard at the hospital while he recovered from his head injury. When he was finally able to speak, his story provided the missing pieces of the puzzle. Frank, a career criminal with a specialty in targeting older homes, had been researching the Martinez property for months. He had learned about the family's history and suspected that the house might contain valuable antiques or hidden treasures. "I spent weeks watching the house and reading old newspaper articles about the family," Frank admitted to detective. "I knew the old man who built the place had been involved in some kind of underground railroad, and I figured there might be valuable historical items hidden somewhere." Frank had discovered the external entrances to the underground complex by studying old survey maps and looking for irregularities in the landscape around the house. Once he found a way in, he had been using the chambers as a base of operations while he planned his robbery of the main house. "I never meant for the kid to get hurt," Frank insisted. "When he found me down there, I panicked. I thought if I could get him to help me find the valuable stuff, we could both benefit from it. I never thought the floor would collapse. The collapse had been caused by Frank's interference with the structural supports of the chamber ceiling. In his eagerness to search for hidden valuables, he had removed several wooden braces that helped support the weight of the concrete floor above. When stepped onto the weakened section of floor while following Frank, their combined weight had been enough to cause the catastrophic failure that trapped them both. Detective explained to Sarah that Frank would face serious charges including kidnapping, breaking and entering, and endangering the welfare of a child. Even though his original plan hadn't included harming, his actions had put the boy's life in danger and caused tremendous suffering for the family. The irony is that he was so focused on finding treasure that he completely missed the real treasure, Doctor observed. The historical value of this underground complex and the documents we found is immeasurable. This site will probably be designated as a historical landmark. As word spread about the discovery, the Martinez family found themselves at the center of a media storm. Reporters from around the state came to interview Sarah and about their ordeal and the historical significance of their property. But for Sarah, the most important treasure she had found was her son, alive and safe after 3 weeks of not knowing his fate. The underground chambers and their historical significance were fascinating, but nothing compared to the relief and joy of having back home. Had become something of a local celebrity, and he handled the attention with the same curiosity and intelligence that had led him to discover the chambers in the first place. He was particularly excited about the possibility that the site would become a museum where other children could learn about the brave families who had hidden their decades earlier. "I want kids to know about the people who lived down there," told a newspaper reporter. "They were really brave, and they helped each other even when it was dangerous. I think that's important for people to remember." The experience had changed both and Sarah in profound ways, had developed a deep appreciation for history, and was already talking about becoming an archaeologist when he grew up. Sarah had discovered a new understanding of her family's legacy and felt a stronger connection to her grandfather's memory than ever before. 6 months after his rescue, the Martinez property had been transformed into something Sarah could never have imagined. The Texas Historical Commission had officially designated the underground complex as a state historical site, and plans were to convert part of it into a museum dedicated to the Mexican-American families who had found refuge there during the 1940s. Sarah had initially been overwhelmed by the attention and the prospect of strangers touring her family's property. But as she learned more about the people her grandfather had helped, she realized that preserving their story was more important than her privacy. Doctor had been working with descendants of the families who had hidden in the chambers, and their stories brought the historical significance of the site to life. Maria Santos, now 89 years old, had been just 12 when her family spent 2 weeks hiding underground in 1943. "Your grandfather saved our lives," Maria told Sarah during a visit to the site. "My father was a U.S. citizen born in Texas, but during the deportation raids, that didn't matter. They were sending away anyone who looked Mexican or had a Spanish name. We would have been separated from our father and sent to a country we had never seen." Maria's family had eventually made their way to California, where they started a new life and built a successful farming business. 3 generations later, Marias were college graduates and community leaders, all because Martinez had given their family a chance to escape persecution. Similar stories emerged from other families who had been helped by the underground network. Sarah learned that her grandfather had worked with a small group of other farmers and business owners in the area, all of whom had risked their own safety to protect their neighbors and friends. The museum project became a community effort, with local schools, historical societies, and Mexican-American organizations contributing to the preservation and interpretation of the site. Became the unofficial youth ambassador for the project, giving tour to school groups and sharing his story with visitors. "The coolest thing about being trapped down there," would tell visitors, "was realizing that all these families had been there before me, and they were brave enough to stay hidden even when they were scared. When I was scared, I thought about them and tried to be brave too." 3 weeks underground had indeed required tremendous courage and resourcefulness. Investigators had determined that he survived by rationing the small amount of food Frank had brought with him, collecting water from the underground spring, and maintaining hope that someone would eventually hear his signals for help. Child psychologists who evaluated after his rescue were amazed by his resilience and positive attitude. Dr. Jennifer Park, who counseled during his recovery, explained that his survival had been aided by his natural curiosity and his ability to find meaning in his situation. "Never saw himself as a victim," Dr. Park observed. "Even while he was trapped, he was exploring and learning about the chambers. He told me that he felt like he was supposed to be there, like it was his job to discover the secret and make sure people knew about it." The psychological evaluation had been important not just for recovery, but also for the legal case against Frank. Frank's lawyer had tried to argue that his client's actions were the result of desperation and mental illness, but the evidence showed a pattern of calculated criminal behavior. Frank eventually pleaded guilty to kidnapping, burglary, and child endangerment charges. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with the judge noting that while Frank's original plan may not have included harming, his actions had put a child's life in serious danger. The defendant's pursuit of material gain resulted in 3 weeks of terror for this family and this community, Judge Maria stated during sentencing. The fact that Martinez survived this ordeal is a testament to his own strength and courage, not to any mercy shown by the defendant. During the legal proceedings, more details emerged about Frank's criminal history and his methods for targeting homes. Police investigations revealed that he had been responsible for a string of burglaries in the area, specifically targeting older homes that he thought might contain valuable antiques or family treasures. The case led to improved security measures and community awareness programs throughout the region. Sarah became an advocate for home security and child safety, speaking at community meetings about the importance of being aware of suspicious activity in neighborhoods. But the most significant change in Sarah's life came from her role as the guardian of her grandfather's legacy. Working with historians and museum professionals, she helped design exhibits that would educate visitors about the deportation raids of the 1940s and the network of people who resisted them. The museum officially opened 1 year after his rescue, with a dedication ceremony attended by dozens of family members of people who had been helped by Martinez and his network. The ceremony was held in the main underground chamber where it had been trapped, now transformed into a memorial space with photographs and artifacts from the families who had found refuge there. Cut the ribbon to officially open the museum, standing in the same spot where Sarah had first heard his voice calling up through the hole in the floor. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. What had begun as a place of fear and imprisonment had become a place of education and remembrance. The museum attracted visitors from around the state and even other parts of the country. School groups came to learn about immigration history. Families came to pay their respects to ancestors who had been helped by the underground network, and researchers came to study the documents and artifacts that had been preserved in the chambers. Sarah found herself becoming something of a local historian, learning everything she could about her grandfather's activities and the broader context of Mexican-American history in Texas. She discovered family letters and documents that revealed Martinez had been motivated by his own family's experiences with discrimination and persecution. His interest in archaeology and history had only grown stronger in the months since his rescue. He spent his free time helping museum staff catalog artifacts and assisting researchers who came to study the site. His experience of living in the chambers for 3 weeks had given him unique insights into how the spaces had been used by the families who hid there. "Can tell you things about those chambers that you can't learn from books or documents," Doctor explained to a group of visiting historians. "He knows which areas stayed warmest in cold weather, where the water collected during rain, which passages carried sound the best. He lived the experience that we're trying to understand academically." As the museum gained recognition, Sarah was approached by filmmakers and authors who wanted to tell the story of rescue and the discovery of the underground complex. She was selective about which projects she supported, wanting to ensure that any media coverage focused on the historical significance of the site rather than sensationalizing ordeal. One documentary project that Sarah did support resulted in a film that premiered at film festivals around the country and eventually aired on public television. The film, titled The Underground Railroad of Texas, used story as a starting point for exploring the broader history of resistance to the deportation raids of the 1940s. The success of the museum and the documentary led to additional research projects and archaeological investigations. Researchers discovered evidence of similar underground networks in other parts of Texas, suggesting that Martinez had been part of a much larger resistance movement than previously known. For Sarah, the most rewarding aspect of the museum project was the connections she made with the families who had been helped by her grandfather. Many of them became regular visitors to the museum, and some volunteered as docents, sharing their family stories with visitors. Now 9 years old, had become mature beyond his years as a result of his experience. But he was still very much a child, with a child's enthusiasm for adventure and discovery. He had plans to study archaeology in college and return to work at the museum as a professional researcher. "I want to find more places like this," told a reporter on the first anniversary of his rescue. "I think there are lots of secrets still hidden underground, and I want to help find them. But next time I'm going to make sure I have a rope and a cell phone before I go exploring." Sarah often reflected on the chain of events that had led from disappearance to the discovery of her grandfather's legacy. If Frank hadn't tried to rob their house, if hadn't been curious about the sounds in the basement, if she hadn't been determined to never give up searching for her son, the underground complex might have remained hidden forever. The experience had taught her that being a warrior didn't always mean fighting obvious battles. Sometimes it meant listening carefully to voices that others couldn't hear, following instincts that others might dismiss, and refusing to accept that important things were lost forever. Standing in the museum that had once been the place of her worst fears, surrounded by visitors learning about courage and resistance, Sarah knew that this ordeal had ultimately served a purpose larger than either of them had imagined. The warrior had indeed shattered the floorboards and found her son, but in doing so, she had also uncovered a treasure that belonged to the entire community, the story of ordinary people who had shown extraordinary courage in dark times.